Y'all know what time it is. This is the In the Scope podcast with your boy, Joshua M. Hicks, senior writer of War Media. And I got a very special guest tonight to come on my podcast to talk about Bulls because, as the old Sam Cooke song will say, change has come. And yes, it has, with the new hiring of the head coach, Billy Donovan, being the new coach of the Bulls. And I got NBC Sports Chicago Bulls writer to come on my show to talk about it. He's been a member of the show before, a guest on the show before. We welcome back Rob Schaefer. Rob, how you doing, man?
I'm great, man. It's busy times, but it's good busy. Like you said, change has taken hold, and we'll see what the fruits of it are. At some point in the future. But it's a good bit of positive momentum for the time being. So it's good to be back with you to break it all down.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. At the end of the day, I'm getting calls. Ain't that something? Ain't nobody called on my show before. Anyways, just diving into the Bulls, man. Like you mentioned, Bulls hired Billy Donovan. Well, I want to know your initial reaction to the hearing of that news. Like, what was your first thoughts when it came to you hearing that the Bulls made this move, especially since this move was such a far left move that no one really expect the Bulls to make?
Yeah, I would say I was surprised. I mean, when you just look at the candidate list that had been set out before us pretty much for the entire process of this search, the themes were longtime assistants, people looking to make their first break into NBA head coaching, and people that the Bulls could kind of build and grow along with the team, and kind of build the program from the ground up. So to see a really established guy of really high stature and Billy Donovan take the job, it was definitely a surprise to me initially, just seeing the Woj tweet, the initial headline. And I think a lot of people felt that way, and then it was kind of confirmed that, it's actually okay to feel that way. It actually was pretty surprising when Billy Donovan came on to the initial press conference, his introductory press conference, when he talked to us in the Chicago media for the first time. I mean, he even said that when he parted ways with the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Bulls job wasn't something that was on his mind. He also revealed that Arturas Karnisovas was on the phone with him literally the day after he and the Oklahoma City Thunder parted ways. So that just tells you what kind of a businessman and a negotiator and a deal maker Arturas Karnisovas is. Like, when he sees his guy, he goes and exhausts every avenue to get him. So it seemed like it was out of left field to Billy Donovan as well. But at the end of the day, I think it's the best hire the Bulls could have made. So after that initial shock wave kind of falls over you, there's also kind of a sense of optimism. There's a sense of, okay, there are a lot of good angles to explore with this hire. So the surprise lasted for a little bit, and then all of a sudden, you get in work mode. And when you get in work mode and you start peeling back the layers of this thing, there kind of isn't there's no stone that you turn over and you think, this could be a negative thing. Pretty much everything that's said about Billy Donovan, everything he could break down about Billy Donovan, seems to indicate that he aligns pretty well with where the Bulls are at right now.
And that's I feel the same way. I actually recently wrote an article about my thoughts on Billy Donovan. I thought that this hire was a much needed hire for the Bulls at this time, because aside from the fact that he has previous head coaching experience, which is something the Bulls haven't done since Scott Skiles, for God's sake. That's 2003. Like,
it's unbelievable. It's really right? Unbelievable.
Yeah. So to go that long hiring a coach that has previous coaching experience, the fact that he's dealt with youth back in the college days and young talent in the NBA, and for me, there's two components that really stood out to me and what this means for the Bulls. Number one was the fact that they're not looking at this current roster structure as a rebuild. They're looking at it as a retool. Mm-hmm. Like, they're looking at it as in, we're going to utilize this roster that we had, and we're going to add to it to build on a foundation that's already built, because it's a solid foundation, because they believe it's a solid foundation already as is. So they're retooling it instead of rebuilding, which is something that, as a Bulls fan, we would love to hear, because we're sick of rebuilds. And then number two, the fact that his player relationships is so strong and so respected across the league, that especially with top-tier free agents, you're talking about 2021 is supposed to be one of the biggest years with top-tier free agents like Anthony Davis and Giannis Antetokounmpo headlining the free agent pool. That's the year the Bulls have the most cap space right now. Yeah. So you're talking about potentially bringing top-tier talent to Chicago. having a coach like Billy Donovan that's respected around the league amongst all top-tier players that he has coached, as well as, like, Paul George, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul as of recent, Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant. These are all players that he's coached, and they all spoke highly of him as well as others around the league. I think that's the key component when it comes to the Bulls actually getting invited to the table. They get invited to top free agents tables and actually having the ability for them to pitch them to listen to their pitches. I think those are the two biggest components that are the most intriguing about this situation. What are your thoughts about what this hiring really can mean for the Bulls?
Yeah, I agree with both of those points. On the retooling point, you heard Arturas Karnisovas say it in Billy Donovan's introductory press conference. He said verbatim, this roster, the talent on this roster, is too good to perform the way that they have the last 2 or 3 years. So that in and of itself, there's a lot of empty talk that can come with these types of press conferences, but there really does seem to be a sense that they are going to commit to trying to develop the talent on the roster, and whatever happens, and they can move forward from there. On the free agent point, Billy Donovan's certainly a guy with good cachet around the league. Arturas Karnisovas is too. So who knows if that translates into one of those really upperest of upper echelon guys deciding to actually come to Chicago next summer or in the near future. But to your point about getting invited to the table, I mean, this time last year, early on in this season, the Bulls were, you couldn't even project the Bulls getting a meeting with people like that. And you really couldn't. And I think that was a pretty harsh reality to deal with as a fan, as someone trying to be optimistic about the future of this franchise, because with all of the supplementary things that are positive about the Bulls, and you hear Karnisovas and Billy Donovan and all the new hires talk about it, the city, the history, things, material things like cap space, like high draft picks, like talent on the roster, none of those things matter unless you have some level of respectability around the league and people trust that if they come into your building, you're going to put them in the best situation to succeed. So I think all of the hires that they made this summer, regardless of if it puts them on the championship track immediately, I think there's still going to be a slow curve to this where, they're not putting playoff expectations on themselves right now. I think a lot of people expect, myself included, that they'll be much closer to competing for a 7 or 8 seed type of position next year. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be in that conversation. I'm not ready to pick them at this point. We got to see how things shake out over the offseason and see when next season's even going to be. But that certainly feels like a reasonable expectation. And then you go from a situation where, last summer your big free agent signings, Thad Young is one that I've spoken about a couple different times in different appearances I made the last few days. He is someone that came aboard to be the veteran presence, and within a month or two of his tenure, he was, leaking displeasures through the media in terms of his playing time, his opportunity, and things like that. And I think that was a pretty harsh indicator of where the Bulls were in terms of the trust in players. Like, if Thad Young, the consummate veteran, can't come in here and feel comfortable in his situation or feel like he trusts the organization, put him in the best situation to succeed, who can trust that? And you go from that to 9 months later to be where we are right now, where we have, the people in charge now seem to have the utmost respect from players around the league, have track records of developing talent. I mean, you mentioned the Florida years with Billy Donovan. Think of all the NBA stars that he was a huge part of their formational years, Bradley Beal, Joakim Noah. The list goes on. So there's that element. There's also the talent that he developed last year in Oklahoma City. That was one of the youngest teams in the league outside of Chris Paul. So, we'll see when the games actually start to get played, how it all translates. I think there's a valid critique of Donovan that says maybe he's not enough of an X's and O's coach, an in-game adjustments coach to get you to the championship level. I think that's what people kind of got on him for in OKC. But I think that's just a few bridges away from the Bulls. And if in 2 years we're talking about Billy Donovan in-game adjustments costing the Bulls a game in the playoffs, I think that'll be a pretty good problem to have, considering where the Bulls have been the last 3 years, because it'll mean they're in a much better position. So I definitely agree with those 2 points in terms of your takeaways. I also think another big takeaway that I have is I think it's really an indicator of how much they nailed the Arturas Karnisovas hire, because for him to be able to go to the most accomplished, highly achieving coach on the market, in a market with, jobs in Houston, jobs in New Orleans, Indiana, Philadelphia, like situations that roster-wise have better rosters than the Bulls right now, have superstars in all those situations, really, except for Indiana. For Arturas to be able to go in and pitch the best coaching candidate on the market in a way that steers him away from those jobs and to Chicago, it means that Arturas's long-term vision is one that is easy to get on the bandwagon for, and he's an effective pitcher, and that he just, has the cachet around the league that people want to work with him. So you couldn't ask for anything more in that respect. Even in 2 or 3 years, if some familiar tropes in terms of in-game adjustments come around in terms of criticisms of Billy Donovan, for now, I don't think there's any reason to be anything but optimistic.
Everybody listening right now, you're listening to Rob Schaefer. Rob, you actually, we were supposed to be obviously meeting up a few days ago, but since that press conference, you've been kind of hectic with the keypads and the typing and the writing, and you wrote a few articles, and on one of the articles you really talked about different ways that Billy Donovan can truly help turn and improve this Bulls franchise. Go more in depth in your analysis as far as what were your thoughts and as far as ideas and things that Donovan can instantly do to help improve this Bulls franchise.
For sure. Well, there were 4 things I listed in that article, and one of them that we've touched on is the kind of reputation around the league, and that could translate to free agent meetings, to bringing in other front office members, draft considerations. Like, there's a lot of different ways that having solid organizational reputation around the league can help you. So that was one of the points I hit. We've touched on that. In terms of some actual X's and O's, like strategic things that he can help with, one thing I thought that stood out, looking at his OKC team from last year specifically, they were probably the best team in close games last year in the league. They led the league in wins in clutch situations, quote unquote, which NBA.com defines as being within 5 points, within 5 minutes or less to go in a game. So they played the most games like that in the NBA, and they won the most games. They were 29-13 in 42 of those games before the coronavirus kind of shut down the league for a couple months there. The Bulls, interestingly, were in the 4th most of those games in the league in terms of being within a 5-point margin down the stretch. Like, as poorly as the Bulls played and performed and as poor as the results were this year, they were a competitive team that kept games close. And I think that actually made it all the more frustrating at times, because there was this inability to really get over the hump, to close games out, to adjust within the flow of the game and really keep the pressure on opponents. So Donovan comes from a situation where, the inverse is that was one of the best teams in the league in actually converting in close games. The Bulls, I think while they were in the 4th most amount of those games, they had the 4th worst winning percentage in the NBA in those games. So I think Donovan immediately helps there. Obviously, the Bulls don't have a Chris Paul like he had in Oklahoma City. I mean, that's one of the best closers in the history of the league. You're not going to be able to replicate that in Chicago, although I do think Zach LaVine is a fairly clutch player, even if the numbers don't bear it out entirely. I think if he's put in the right positions, he could certainly grow into an effective closer in that role. So I think coming from that background, I think just his acumen in terms of timeout usage, drawn up out of timeout plays, just in having the team prepared to compete down the stretch of games and actually, finish off these contests that they're so close in. I think that'll be a major improvement, because I just, all the criticism of Jim Boylan, I think one that is very fair is that his teams just didn't win close games. And I think a lot of that falls on him in terms of the things I mentioned, timeout usage, drawn up out of timeout plays, just having the motivation there to really, perform and execute down the stretch of those games. That just wasn't consistently there. So that's one X's and O's thing I think he can help with. Another thing is, and it's another, the only thing we could compare him to is Jim Boylan. I think a theme of the Jim Boylan tenure is he implemented systems on offense and defense, and he did it with good intentions. He implemented the offensive system he implemented to try to bring the Bulls to having a more modern offense, to shoot more threes, to get more looks at the rim, to play a more up-tempo style, to kind of cut the mid-range out to a degree that is reasonable. And he thought that would maximize the talent on the roster. It didn't. The style that they played didn't have good results. They were the 2nd worst rated offense in the NBA last year. And they were a lot of key pieces regressed, Lauri Markkanen being the most obvious one in terms of being an offensive player that didn't perform up to his potential last year. I don't know how a Billy Donovan coached Bulls team will play. He says that he likes ball movement, player movement. He likes a kind of fluid, democratic offensive system where everybody's involved. So I'd imagine those principles will be included in whatever play style they decide on. But the thing that stood out to me most studying Billy Donovan coach teams is he really lets his players dictate the style of play that he eventually lands on. And I think that'll be another refreshing change in terms of he has really committed. He even said in the press conferences, Zach LaVine has talked about this a little bit too. He has said that in the past, he has built his style of play in collaboration with his players, especially his best players. You saw that with Oklahoma City last year. They were in the top half of shooting threes in the league 2 years ago. Last season, when your three best players are Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Chris Paul, and Dennis Schroeder, they shot a ton of mid-range shots. They didn't play at a fast pace. They slowed the game down. They ran a lot of pick and roll and isolation, which might not be traditionally, with the times, quote unquote, in terms of how a lot of modern offenses play. But he decided to play that way because it suited his best players. And the Thunder had a lot of success. They were on a 50-win pace before the season shut down. So I think that adaptability, that ability to listen to your players, collaborate with your players, and adjust on the fly to their needs, I think that's another thing that's really going to help the Bulls a lot. And I think you might see those pieces that stagnated or regressed, the Lauri Markkanens, the Wendell Carters if he can stay healthy, Otto Porter Jr. if he could stay healthy. I think you'll see whatever the system ends up looking like, I think you will see a real intention from the head coaching seat to maximize each individual player by really listening to them and figuring out how they want to play. So that'll be a change from how the Bulls usually do business. The good news is there's kind of nowhere to go but up in terms of the offensive efficiency department. So I just think all of those things help. Obviously, the player development aspect we've touched on too. I think the adaptability point goes into the player development point. He's shown an ability to really empower players and develop young guys. So I think when you put all of that together, maybe it's just that, again, on the heels of the Jim Boylen era, there's kind of nowhere to go but up. But I do think there are, even early on, some concrete areas that we can pinpoint that Billy Donovan is really going to help this team, and those are what I think they are.
I think for me, I'm really intrigued by who he will have as part of his coaching staff, especially here in Chicago. There's a lot of options he could go with. And I think one of the options that was actually reported that he may even consider is somebody like a Mo Cheeks, who is a Chicago native.
Chicago, baby. Yeah,
that'd be
great.
Yeah, Chicago native. And he actually has experience coaching with Donovan in Oklahoma City Thunder with coaching those superstars. And those superstars do have a lot of respect for Mo Cheeks, even when he was at one time a head coach. So I'm intrigued as far as what is going to be his surrounding coaching pool going to be from the staff perspective. Have you heard of maybe any type of discussion around the league as far as who he might consider bringing onto his staff?
Yeah, I think it's early. We did ask him about that in his introductory press conference. He said basically the only thing he was willing to say was that him and Arturas will be collaborating on it. That's kind of the relationship that it seems like they'll have. It'll be a quote-unquote partnership. Both of them use that word a lot. They'll kind of be involved in making those decisions together. I think it's a little too early to go beyond speculation on that. I think the Mo Cheeks thing is, educated speculation. It's something that makes a lot of sense for all the reasons that you said. The one thing I did think it was interesting that Billy said was that he's going to take into consideration heavily the people already on Chicago staff. I think the two names that most people know the most are Chris Fleming and Roy Rogers, who were brought in as part of Jim Boylen's staff last year. So I'll be interested to see what those decisions are, especially because Chris Fleming is running the Bulls minicamp right now at the Advocate Center. He's kind of leading that. He's someone that, again, even though the offense didn't perform up to even people's lowest expectations last year, he's someone that still garners a lot of respect around the league. And I think, I don't think it would be destructive if he got a chance to continue being the lead assistant. I don't think that would be the wrong call at all necessarily. I'll be interested to see what he does. I do think another thing that's important to note with the Donovan hire in terms of the money that it costs to get him and the money that it's, reportedly cost to get Karnisovas and all these other pieces that are coming into the Bulls franchise this offseason while they're still eating the last 2 years of Jim Boylen's contract. They paid Gar Forman to leave. There's all these aspects to it, especially in a pandemic where revenues are getting hit. I think the one thing that we know for sure is if Donovan wants to go another direction with the coaching staff entirely and clean it out and bring in all of his own staff, it seems like the checkbook is open right now to the point that if him and Karnisovas are dead set on a plan and they can sell it to ownership, it seems like that flexibility and that cooperation is there. So there's another sign, to be encouraged by if you're a Bulls fan. There's another thing that kind of bodes well about these hires and how they've played out is that it does seem like they will have the autonomy to do whatever they have to do there. So in terms of concrete names, I think it's early. Billy hasn't even been around the team yet. He's in Florida right now, and he won't be at the Advocate Center workouts. There's still a long offseason ahead. When we get through the playoffs, there will be obviously the draft in November. It doesn't look like we're looking at a start for next season until early 2021. So we got time to work that stuff out, but that's something I'll be watching closely too, because it'll be interesting to see how much this is really created in their vision, or how much they're willing to continue in terms of the staff decisions, what's been going on with the Bulls. That'll certainly be something to watch.
Yeah, everybody listening right now, you're listening to NBC Sports Chicago Bulls writer Rob Schaefer. Rob, I want to transition to the press conference, because the press conference itself was very interesting to hear from others that have been reporting on, the introductory to Billy Donovan. And I think one of the things that stuck out to me from what I was hearing was the fact that Billy openly said what brought him to Chicago was the fact that Arturas made it known he wants a partnership. And that's something that oftentimes is important, but sometimes overlooked when it comes to the relationship of the front office and the coach and trying to develop the best team possible. And for Arturas to come out and say, I need a partnership with the guy, even if I don't know the person, if I believe he's a good fit, I want to build this relationship to where we can work together and get the best results out of the options that we can get, then that's an automatic Bull sign. It runs away from the mom and pop operation, mom and dad pop operation, where you just do what as I say and everything goes. You know what I'm saying? That's a change that's really important for the Bulls to have. From obviously, you mentioned you listened in on the press conference and things of that sort. What were some of the components that really stuck out to you that gave you that sign? That gave you that sign that the Bulls are serious now. Like, this is the real deal that they're really stepping into.
Yeah, the partnership thing was huge. That was a huge theme and through line that kind of threaded the entire press conference. I thought that was hugely significant. I thought it was hugely significant that both of them acknowledged we didn't know each other going into this interview process. I think it's so commonplace for new executives to fall into that quote unquote, it's who you know kind of mentality when you're looking for new hires like this. But I think it's just a really good sign, like, again, for those two to not have actually directly met before, but to have hit it off to the point that both of them are talking really with all the partnership talk. They were talking like they're lifelong friends, and that they're, excited to go on this endeavor together at long last, but really they just met. That stood out to me as hugely significant, especially because if you look at Karnisovas's past situation in Denver, where they obviously have had a lot of success, it was a similar kind of relationship from everything that Michael Malone has said, the head coach of the Nuggets, and everything Karnisovas and Tim Connolly have said, where that synergy, that collaboration, that being on the same page between the front office and the coaching staff. I think the fact that was a wide open collaborative process in Denver and that worked bodes well for the Bulls if they're going to go down a similar path. So I think that stood out. We've touched on the adaptability theme, just how seriously Billy Donovan takes player development and how much he's really going to factor in his players' needs and desires into, forming game plans, in building strategies for how this team's going to move forward. I think that really stood out as something fundamental to his philosophy, and another break from the Bulls' recent past. So that stood out. And again, I just think it can't be overstated. The fact that Arturas Karnisovas is in a market full of desirable head coaching vacancies, he saw the man that he wanted. As soon as he became available, Karnisovas said that he didn't think Billy Donovan was going to become available, but once he did, he was on the phone with him the next day. He was down in Florida meeting with him for 5 or 6 hours the next week, and then the week after that, he's the head coach. So it just shows you that there is kind of a weird allure. There's a magnetism back to the Bulls. This is an organization that people of high stature and high respect actually want to be a part of. So I think to be able to combine the actual people working in the organization with the brand's history is huge. So those things all stuck out to me. We'll see where it goes. I guess another thing that stuck out to me, Billy Donovan says he's still in touch with Joakim Noah. I know a lot of people are hoping for that reunion. I think that'd be awesome to see, especially someone covering the team. I'd love to cover Joe. I'd love for him to be back in town in the Udonis, quote unquote, Udonis Haslam role. I mean, that'd be tremendous fun. But it does, it just goes to show that there's just a lot of goodwill around the organization right now. Like little fun storylines like that are are popping up. But yeah, I agree with you. Those are the things that stuck out to me.
You mentioned Joakim Noah and players that, have wide respect for Coach Donovan, that especially as I played for him. We all know Joakim Noah, even though he's a huge figure within the Bulls franchise. He played for Billy Donovan in Florida. Another name that comes up is Bradley Beal. He played for him at Florida. Bradley Beal does have an option to opt out of his contract after this season.
Thinking big.
I know we got Zach LaVine. I love Zach. That's my guy. I wouldn't want him to go anywhere. But when I talk about superstar talent that can get the job done like Bradley Beal can do in a way that he can do it, I mean, is this something the Bulls really consider, especially now that you potentially got AD coming in next year, coming into free agency next year? You got Giannis potentially coming in free agency next year. Like, the next year free agency pool is going to be pretty it's going to be pretty full. So with top tier talent, so do you consider bringing in those type of guys, especially if they already have a previous relationship with Billy Donovan? Do the Bulls really take that extra leap there, or do you just let Donovan play things out and just see where it goes?
I'll be interested to see, because, I think it's hard not to dream of that stuff. And actually now the Bulls, who have just never been a free agent destination, and like really not even close. So it feels weird to be able to dream of that kind of stuff. I certainly think, it has to be on your radar. I mean, any high profile player, and they'll have the cap flexibility to do it. That has to be something that's in the calculus to some degree, even off to the side. But I'll be interested to see, because, Arturas Karnisovas, the front office he was a part of in Denver, really built that team through the draft. And the biggest free agent on that team is Paul Millsap. And he was, like, I think the biggest in terms of salary free agent signing in Denver Nuggets history. So I think that's notable in terms of the cachet they were able to build around the Nuggets organization. But I'll be interested to see how much the free agent aspect is a focus, because Karnisovas' history is building through the draft, is developing talent, kind of finding it, developing it, retaining it. I'll be interested to see, because that has been his strategy, and I think it's if you can nail that strategy, it's the most sustainable over the long term. But now that he's in a market like Chicago, and he has all these big market resources, and he has this kind of timeless, global, iconic brand behind him, I do wonder if he kind of rubs his hands together and he's like, well, I know that I could do this way, but at the same time, like, I could really speed this process up. I could really expedite this. I could really augment the moves that I'm making everywhere else by going after big fish in free agency. I'll be interested to see. I'm not ready to say that the Bulls are number one on any of these guys' lists yet. I think next season is going to be huge in that respect, the same way that I thought this year was huge in that respect, because I think to be able to attract those free agents, you see what Brooklyn did 2 years ago. You have to have that year where you show that you're able to develop young talent, that you have an intriguing roster, that the only thing they're missing is the last superstar piece. So a team like the Nets, a team like the Clippers, it obviously flamed out. But what those two teams were able to do in their years before the big free agency summers, making that run, being a team that is widely considered to have a lot of potential, then you could get in the door for those free agents. So I'm not willing to let myself get too many steps ahead of myself for that yet. But I do think this season you really are going to want to see a 10 to 15 game improvement in the win column. You're going to want to see a run at the 8th seed. And even like the Clippers, if you can, show that you could be even competitive in a playoff format, I mean, those things to me will go much further of a way towards actually assuring superstars that, hey, I can come here and succeed, than the Billy Donovan thing on its own. The Billy Donovan thing and the Arturas Karnisovas thing, those are two great first steps, but there is still the matter of translating it to the court. Because at the end of the day, the biggest factor for anybody who fancies themselves a superstar in the league is going to be winning, especially a guy like Bradley Beal, who, he's been to the second round in his career, I think. But, like, he's a guy that's just too good to not, be playing deep into the playoffs in the prime of his career. So that's going to be the top consideration in his mind. So at the end of the day, they're just going to have to come out and show market improvement actually on the court this year. I don't see why there's no confidence that they couldn't do it. I think they certainly could. But we just have a little bit of a wait to see what that actually looks like.
I think we also cannot dismiss the hiring of Mark Eversley and his connection with Nike. That's going to be huge.
Absolutely.
A lot of top-tier talent are connected to Nike in some way, shape, or form. And the fact that he has those
Absolutely.
connections and those relationships, I don't know, it could play a role, especially if you talk about maybe just luring Anthony Davis from a potential championship team with the Lakers to come back home. That might be
Absolutely.
a big deal. But transitioning from that component that you mentioned to winning on the court, they did start voluntary workouts this past week. Players have come out to get their reps in since they weren't able to participate in any way, shape, or form over the offseason with the bubble. So my question for you is, since they started doing voluntary workouts to get back to the swing of things, who would you want to see have that blossoming impact, that huge game leap from one year to the next? Like, as we prepare for next year, who do you think that guy would be? Obviously, for me, I really hope it is Kobe White to take that additional next step, especially when you talk about the point guard role itself. Growing into the point guard that we know he has the potential to be, instead of just being a scoring point guard. I'm hoping he can take that next level so we can have a more consistent backcourt with him and Zach LaVine, which thrived very well, especially in the second half of the season last year. But in your opinion, who's someone that you're looking at that you're hoping could take that next step next year?
I think it's 1A, 1B. I think Kobe would certainly be one of those two that I would say tied for first for all the reasons you said. If he's going to be the starting point guard next to Zach LaVine, and they both know this, they both say this. These are words straight out of their mouth. They both know that they just have to be better in terms of playmaking, in terms of getting other guys involved, in terms of being that facilitator at the lead guard spot and being on ball. So I would love to see Kobe take that next step next year. That's one thing I would be looking out for. You mentioned him and Zach as a backcourt thriving at the end of last year. I mean, they love playing together. They both say it repeatedly. The problem is, by the time Kobe finally got his first start, Zach was out with a quad injury. Season ends the next night. So it's just, these are the things that seemed in the past era of Bulls basketball just seemed to always happen. It seemed like lightning strikes this team 5 or 6 different times throughout a season, So Kobe, for all those reasons, is one that I have an eye on. But I think the first name that actually came to mind when you asked that question is Lauri Markkanen. In a contract year, after a season that really, after such a promising first 2 years, and especially in his second season, that month of February that he had, so much optimism, especially as a 1-2 punch with Zach exiting last season. Just such an underwhelming and disappointing third year. I don't think anyone would dispute that, even Lauri. I'm sure that he's been kind of grinding and preparing for next year as hard as anyone. He's the guy, especially considering that when Arturas Karnisovas was hired, he pinpointed Lauri. Mark Eversley did too. They both pinpointed Lauri as a guy that they needed to get the bottom of why that next step didn't happen for him next year, and to make sure that he's in the position to do it in his 4th season. So I think for his sake, because he's in a contract year, for the Bulls' sake, because they've invested a top 10 pick in him, and he has showed the potential to be possibly that foundational guy down the road. I think for both parties, this season is going to really say a lot in terms of what his future is going to be with the team, what his future is going to be in the league. So I think that is the guy that I really am watching the closest going into next year. There's ancillary guys too, I think, but mostly it's a health concern for a lot of these side guys like Wendell Carter Jr. I actually don't want to paint him as a side guy because I think he's maybe the member of the core that I'm highest on in terms of his two-way impact. But for him, I think I trust that progression to continue for him, especially under a guy like Billy Donovan, who we've talked about has developed guys like Joakim Noah, Al Horford, the exact type of big man that Wendell Carter Jr. has the potential to be. I think for him, it's just a matter of staying healthy. For a guy like Chandler Hutchison, who showed flashes last year, it's just a matter of staying healthy. Otto Porter Jr., same thing. But in terms of actually showing that they can blossom in these mini camps and carrying that momentum into next year, Lauri is the guy. Lauri is the guy for me, for sure.
Well, one thing that we do know that AK is very known for is developing talent through the draft. And the Bulls do have a top 4 pick this year, which is the first time in a long time, since Derrick Rose most likely, that we've had a top 4 pick. We've been stuck at 7 for the past 3 years. So for us to get out of that 7th pick and move up in the draft to the 4th pick, I actually think it's a kind of a tough position because, especially with this draft, you pretty much have 3 main guys that are like ideal top 3 you have to go with. After that, it's really up in the air. And the Bulls, with them being that 4th pick, you have to wonder whether they're actually going to stay there, whether they're going to trade up or trade down, or utilize it to get a top-tier quality veteran type of player. There's endless options for the Bulls to really pursue. And at least from what I've heard from reporting is the fact that one of the guys that they've looked at that number 4 spot is Denny. And I have a hard time pronouncing his last name, so forgive me for that. But
I think it's Avdia.
Avdia. Yeah. I just call him Denny for short. But Denny is a guy where, Denny's a guy that it seems, at least from a European perspective, can fit what Arturas is looking for. But many question: do you really want to spend a whole 4th pick on that? You know what I'm saying? Is he worth that high of a pick? So, in your opinion, if you're Arturas Karnisovas, what would you actually really consider doing with the 4th pick? Do you consider going with that option? Do you consider going with Obi, who is another guy, the guy from Dayton that people have mentioned? Do you maybe potentially move up to get like a James Wiseman or maybe a LaMelo Ball? Having your backcourt with Zach LaVine, which I think would be actually very intriguing, especially if you have Kobe White still coming as your backup point guard off the bench. So what option, if you're Arturas, would you be really looking at with that 4th pick?
Well, I agree with you in terms of being high on LaMelo and his fit with this team, because I just think a 3-guard lineup configuration of him, Kobe, and Zach would just be so interesting offensively, especially if utilized, in the most efficient way. So I don't know if LaMelo falls to 4. Like you said, it kind of reminds me, not in terms of the quality of the draft itself, but it kind of reminds me of last year's in the sense of, okay, you have Zion and you have Ja, and then after that, it's kind of just anybody's guess in terms of who you're taking for the rest of the top 10. It reminds me of that this year with Anthony Edwards, LaMelo, and James Wiseman. I think Denny fits the style that Arturas Karnisovas seems to prefer. He fits a lot of the Bulls' needs in terms of, I think their biggest need, I don't know if it has to come from one specific position, but I just think their biggest need is playmaking, passing, facilitating, being able to set guys up. Because you look at a lot of the guys on this team, I think Lauri Markkanen, I think Zach LaVine, Kobe White, and Wendell Carter Jr., I think they all fall into a category of being really good play finishers, but not all of them, except Wendell has shown flashes of passing that I think could be explored a little bit more. But none of them really seem to be that prototypical lead initiator that's going to, connect an entire offense. I think guys like Denny, LaMelo, even a guy like Tyrese Halliburton, Killian Hayes is a guy that a lot of smart draft people have brought up as being intriguing at that spot. Maybe he's a little bit of a reach. But the more you watch of, the more I watch of him, at least, the more I love him. I think that's the biggest area of need. If I'm Arturas Karnisovas, I don't know if I go through with it, but I would probably explore every avenue of possibly looking to trade down. I just think that could be a really prudent move in what many consider a weak draft class. What is the big difference between, like, let's say you take a team like the Knicks who maybe wants to make the big splash and turn things around quickly. If you move back to number 8 and you pick up an asset or two for the future, and, at number 8, you're still looking at a guy like Devin Vassell. You could even get a guy like Tyrese Halliburton, maybe even Killian Hayes there. I just think once you get out of that top 3, the prospects from 4 to 10, I think any of them can help the Bulls in their own specific way. So for me, I think if they traded down, it would be something that could be a really prudent move. But we'll see. It's anyone's guess at this point. The combine actually starts, as we're taping this on a Sunday, the combine actually starts tomorrow. So we'll start to get some official measurements in. We'll start to see, hopefully we can get a glimpse into how these guys actually look in workouts, what they've been working on in the hiatus, what their thought process is, what teams they've been talking to, because teams have been able to do virtual interviews. That could give us an indicator in terms of what different teams' interest patterns are. So it'll be interesting. I think any option is on the table for them, because Karnisovas and Mark Eversley at each of their past stops have shown a willingness to trade up, down, trade out, take the best talent available, even if it causes a logjam. So really nothing would surprise me. If I'm in their seat, I'm glad I'm not in their seat, actually, because I have no idea what I would do. There's so many different options on the table. But trading down to me is something that I think could make sense. I also think just snagging a playmaking guy like a Denny or a Killian, or if he falls, a LaMelo, just makes too much sense. Just when you consider that it seems like the thing that this roster is missing is just that one piece that kind of ties all the talent together. It seems like it's just a lot of individual talent that needs that connective tissue. And Billy Donovan seems to be a good coach to strategize how they could do that. And this draft offers an intriguing opportunity to get a player that could help along that path too.
What are your thoughts on RJ Hampton? I think it's been reported that the Bulls have interviewed RJ Hampton already.
I did see that, yeah.
Yeah, so what do you think about RJ Hampton as, the scoring point guard that he can be, and he's played, in the same league as Lamelo Ball did coming out of high school without going, playing professional overseas basketball that way. He was a top tier talent that skipped college to go pro.
Oh, yeah.
Overseas. So what do you think about his skill set and how it could potentially fit the Bulls as well?
Yeah, a great athlete. I think widely considered a little bit raw in terms of his shooting. I think that's a question mark, as it is with a lot of these guys. I mean, we didn't really get into the red flags, but a guy like Denny has big red flags on his jump shot. So does LaMelo. In a draft that's widely considered pretty weak, everyone's going to have red flags, right? RJ is intriguing. I think his stock really slipped this year because, statistically, by the numbers, he just didn't have that great of a season overseas. I'm not going to hold that super hard against him because he was playing in a professional league. And although LaMelo put up better numbers, RJ was on a better actual team. He was in a better, a more competitive team within that league. So a little bit harder to get reps, a little bit harder to really make the big splash impact that maybe he has the potential to. At 4, he'd be a little bit of a reach for me if I'm the Bulls. Now, in a scenario where you trade back, like I think I even saw this floating around Twitter the other day, not reported, but just kind of trade ideas that people were shooting around. Like the Celtics have multiple first-round picks. Like let's say you traded back to really the back part of the lottery and you're in the 10 to 15 range. Then is a guy like that worth the swing? Absolutely, I would think. Because you just can't argue with that top 10 coming out of high school, a really highly recruited talent that people just thought this guy's going to make an impact in the league. Worth noting is that Arturas Karnisovas took a guy pretty similar to that, Emmanuel Mudiay, who foregoed NCAA play, and he went over and played in China, and it hurt his stock in terms of people thinking he was going to be a top 2 or 3 pick. He ended up going 7th to Denver. So I don't know if that means anything, but it just shows that Arturas Karnisovas, if he sees the talent there, he's going to pounce on it. And it seems like the Nuggets have swung and connected there more times than swung and missed. So RJ at 4 might be a little bit of a reach to me. If they trade back, is he an option? Maybe. I think he comes with athletic tools that maybe are a little bit better than some of the guys ahead of him, but also the weaknesses are I don't like the word weaknesses, but the improvement areas, the things that people think he needs to improve to reach that next level. There's a few more of those than some guys ahead of him too. So it's just a tough calculation. It just shows you how unpredictable this class is, really.
Well, obviously we're not AK, so we ain't got to worry about that. But AK,
and thank God, man, I just get to criticize him for whatever he does. I just get to nitpick and analyze. That's what I'm meant to do. That's what I was born to do. Not actually make the big decisions. So
right. And AK has been proven that he when he spots, like you mentioned, when he spots good talent, he'll take it, and 9 times out of 10 he'll develop it. If you see what he did in Denver, you see exactly what that looks like. So, and AK we trust when it comes to this draft process and building this team together. With that being said, though, Rob, what you got coming up, man? I know you've been a busy guy, writing all these Bulls articles and doing a heck of a job on the Bulls Talks podcast with Casey Johnson and Jason Goff and those guys, man. You're doing a great job over there with them. But what you got coming up for our audience to pay attention and tune into?
Yeah, so with the coach hire out of the way, that was a big tentpole for us. We're just going to be diving into off-season stuff over the next couple weeks. Like I said, the combine starts tomorrow, so we'll get a chance to actually hear from and talk to some of these prospects. I think some interesting stuff could come out of there. So we'll just be in full draft mode over at NBC Sports Chicago and on the Bulls Talk podcast for the next couple weeks and months. Probably some free agency talk too, as we kind of, now that the Bulls have a coach, it's a little bit easier to project what they might be interested in as we kind of figure out what the style of play might be, things like that. And we'll be tracking, the Bulls are in this mini camp for another 2 weeks, or a week and a half, something along those lines. So we'll be tracking that and talking to guys, hopefully pretty regularly out of there, see how guys look, see how guys are progressing, and just see the chemistry and the camaraderie being built. I think that's always a good thing too. So those are all the big Bulls storylines to hit. We'll be all over those. Like you said, Bulls Talk Podcast, NBCSportsChicago.com. I'm over on Twitter at Rob_Schaefer. So that's a good place to be checking any of that stuff out too. But, for a time when the Bulls haven't played in 6 months, there's a lot going on, it seems like. So, grateful for that. Grateful as we're taping this, I think Celtics Heat just hit halftime. Jimmy Butler might be in the finals by the end of tonight. I don't want to jinx anything there, but that'll certainly have a lot of Bulls ramifications too in terms of things to talk about and break down and relitigate, especially as the Bulls rebuild kind of tries to get back on track that started with the Jimmy Butler trade. You wouldn't think it, but there's a ton going on in Bulls world right now. So excited about that.
Yeah, we're excited, and we're excited to follow what you guys are going to be putting out there. I know I'll be paying attention, and you guys are doing a lot of great work over there. So continue to keep up the good work. Everybody
Appreciate
listening
that.
right now, you can follow my social media on Instagram at that guy Josh Hicks, and on Twitter at jhicks042 for more of the latest content, sports, all things sports as well, especially within the NBA. Because like you just mentioned, Rob, we may have a LeBron versus Jimmy Butler's finals. And I am very excited for that. That'll be amazing. Who would have thought that Jimmy Butler left the Bulls to go to the finals? Yikes, right? But I'm excited for that. I hope that continues to comes into fruition. And Rob, continue to stay safe out there during this pandemic. Continue to do good work within this reporting. And thank you for coming back on the show. We really appreciate it, giving us all the insight on the Bulls. Looking forward to keeping in touch soon. And, as we prepare for the draft and, free agency and everything, we'd love to have you come back on and talk about what the Bulls are thinking.
Anytime, man. Just hit my line. Anytime. Appreciate you having me on.
Problem, man. You have a good time. You have a good rest of your evening.
You too.
All right.
You too. And stay safe, 100%.
Yes, sir. You too.